I just love it when they dance the Horda. Care to join me?
Welcome, friends. We are back talking Futurama, Season 12, Episode 3. This is the one entitled The Temp. Now, spoilers will lie ahead, so if those aren't for you, take this as your last warning. But before we crack into the show, some exciting news.
Oh, I remember.
That's right, I've opened memberships on this channel, so if you want to join the crew of the USS Windgrace like my current Chief Operations Officer, that old Yorkshire geek, well, you can do so by hitting that join button, which probably hopefully just glowed down below.
And the peasants rejoice.
The Temp, the third episode of the 12th season of Futurama, the second season on this Hulu revival, for the first time in quite a while, felt like it actually captured and encapsulated the essence of prior years of Futurama. That's not to say this was a hit it out of the park episode. It wasn't an all-time classic as far as really hitting the emotional notes or doing something spectacularly new with a sci-fi idea. This felt like a more back to basics when it was in its prime Futurama adventure episode. It really didn't have any down moments. Sure, not all of the jokes landed, but for the most part there was so much jam-packed into this episode, so much adventure, so many little wacky shenanigans, so many character moments, so many, I don't want to say twists and turns, but changes to the status quo of the storyline, connections to prior storylines, and just moving things along, that it really felt like there was no dead air. There was no dead time. All the characters were given something to do within the story for the most part that worked for their character and advanced the story, even if it was just kind of jokey, quippy moments. So as I mentioned in my prior couple of episodes, it definitely felt like something was missing from the Futurama formula, the Futurama equation. Even though I liked Quid's game, there was just something inherently missing, a missing piece that felt like it was keeping the show from hitting the heights or the strides that it used to hit. I'm not saying this episode necessarily recaptured all of the glory, but for my money, if you slotted this into one of the golden era runs of the show, it wouldn't really feel all that out of place. It would just be kind of another regular episode in the midst of that run, and I think that's absolutely what this era of Futurama needs to aim for. Sure, it would be great to have a couple of humdingers, and I don't know why I said humdingers. Nobody has said that word in this millennium. That's really what I think they need to strive for. They don't need to hit home runs every time. They don't need to have existentially grand stories or anything like that. They need to focus on a fun, self-contained story within the Futurama universe, utilizing the characters and settings and places that they've already established while still introducing new ones, and that's exactly what this episode did for me. The connection to the 23 years earlier, the Snoo episode, bringing in, I almost said Lursa and Beitor, Lur and his wife. That was a fun wedding sequence, or re-wedding sequence. I think it was a missed opportunity to have the Space Pope be the one that was marrying them, but at the end of the day, I know that didn't fit in with the Jewish aesthetic they were trying to go for. Speaking of which, lots of good Star Trek references in this episode. Very much loved the Horda being involved here, as well as the very start of the episode where we had a captain's diary type thing. They went around and introduced a bunch of the characters. For whatever reason, that felt like it would have been a perfect introduction to this season coming back from the break. Have this be the first episode where we actually get to see all of our characters doing something in the episode. Even the entire storyline of Fry being missing and the mystery of figuring out what happened to him, I think would have been great for a season opener. Having that be the NFT episode and ostensibly just a storyline about Bender discovering more about his backstory, more about who he actually is, that felt like more of a mid-season type of episode, focusing on one character and one character only. I think had they opened the season with this episode, it would have been a much stronger kick the door in, we're back, this is what we're doing, here's all the characters, let's go, we're back at it again. And the whole book subplot going on here, I know if this was a more serious show, you could sit down and nitpick it 10 ways to Sunday about, well, we've seen in Futurama past, books still exist, people reading books, especially and distinctly that episode where the brains read the books. It's a fun, jokey Futurama moment. It doesn't have to necessarily fit airtight within the canon we've seen before. There has been things like that in Futurama past. There's going to be things in Futurama going forth. I don't really think that counts as canon breaking in a show like this. I guess if I were to levy any real complaints against this episode, it would have to be the revelation of who Frank, this temp guy, this mysterious component, actually was. Didn't last as long as I would have liked it to be. When it first started, I thought they were going to play it off like that TNG episode Conundrum, I think it was, where suddenly this mysterious officer is on the bridge. Everyone had lost their memory, so nobody finds that odd except us, the audience. I thought it was going to be something along those lines, and we were going to discover more sinister things as the story went along. Instead, the revelation came fairly quickly into the episode, and we were given the revelation that he was actually the temp hired, and somehow through flashback we were shown how everything started 23 years ago. I don't mind that. I actually like the progression of Frank's storyline throughout the whole history of the past 23 years. All of that worked well. I think personally I would have just preferred a bit more mystery surrounding him as far as us, the audience, go, and not having that revelation come until maybe a midway point, so that all of the interactions between Not Fry and the rest of the crew could have felt a little bit more sinister, even when he wasn't acting sinister. Maybe have that little eye-rolly thing happen a couple of times for us to put together. There absolutely is something going on here. That being said, that would fall more in line with a sinister plot line, and of course, he wasn't really a sinister character. He was somebody abandoned by our crew 23 years ago, and they completely forgot about him. If this was an earlier season of Futurama, maybe 5 or 6 or something like that, I could absolutely see this being a great character to suddenly pop back up into the show a few years down the line. But the caveat to that is he needs to rest for a while. You can't bring him back a few episodes down the line, or even next season, for it to really have that impact. You kind of need to let him rest for 3-4 years minimum maybe, and then suddenly have a reappearance when nobody's expecting it, which really falls in line with his whole character model anyway. And the fact that the series is so long in the tooth and has been canceled so many times, I'm not certain we're going to get that much more Futurama to bring him back in a 15th, 16th season. Whereas, had he been introduced in Season 5 and then he reappeared for the first time now in Season 12, that would have had the impact and the oomph I really would have appreciated, and that seemingly is what they actually tried to do in this episode by tying him back to events that took place way back in the timeline, but obviously with a character who wasn't actually present. It was kind of a midquel between events we actually saw in the past. What did you think of this episode? For whatever reason, it really stuck out to me as a highlight of the Hulu revival series, not because it stood out as some sort of grand opus or philosophical existential journey or anything, but because it squarely felt like a regular adventure of Futurama from start to finish. No dead space, no downtime. It could slot into anywhere in the older seasons and feel like it was a classic Futurama episode, but it was made today in the current era, and for whatever reason, the current era is missing a little something that this episode actually seemed to include. Here's hoping we get more like these. Again, not saying I don't want any more of the grand philosophy stuff we get sometimes, but a nice, fun, self-contained story like this is really what I think we need more of. And then to have a couple of those experimental, really philosophical episodes per season with some of these filling in the rest of it, that I think is the real core of what makes a good Futurama season a great Futurama season. Whatever you thought, leave all that down below. Like, share, subscribe, join if you want to become a member, do all those fancy YouTube things. But until next time...
I have no characteristics, and people forget me as soon as I leave the room. And sometimes before that.